other Christian organizations and Christians generally, exploring issues of mutual interest. And our purpose is to promote serious intellectual discussion amongst Christians and indeed society generally about topical issues of public concern. For us, debate is and considered discussion is a healthy, indeed vital element to properly and persuasively explaining the Christian ethical position to a world which is either indifferent to or indeed is hostile to Christian values. And in organizing this conference, this virtual conference today, we're applying our collective wisdom in exploring the topical issue of assisted suicide. This has been made particularly topical by the introduction of an assisted dying bill to Dáil Éireann. It has the Orwellian title of Dying with Dignity bill, and this bill, if passed, would effectively legalize euthanasia under certain limited circumstances. The bill says if people are terminally ill, this is an option. And what is particularly disturbing, in fact, is the ease with which this bill has moved from the initial stages, legislative stages, to the committee stage in Dáil Éireann, and that we found that disturbing. There's been little or no serious debate about it publicly or indeed evidently in Dáil Éireann. And of course, in all probability, what happens in the south will impact on thinking and possibly potential legislation north of the border in our own devolved assembly. And inevitably, this bill, particularly if it's passed, will have an unwelcome impact on Parliament at Westminster, where this type of bill has been introduced but successfully defeated in past number of years. The challenge for all of us in Iona, Northern Ireland, is to marshal our arguments against this fundamental change in the law in the south, here in Northern Ireland, and indeed at Westminster. And this morning we have three excellent speakers on this subject, and I look forward to hearing from them and indeed from you, our virtual audience, over the next hour and 3/4. The first speaker is philosophy lecturer at St. Patrick's College, Maynooth, Gaven Kerr, who's originally from Belfast and a member of the Iona Northern Ireland Board. He's an enthusiastic disciple of Thomas Aquinas, indeed a big fan of Thomas Aquinas, and has written 2 books, Aquinas' Way to God, The Proof in De Ente et Essentia, that's 2015, and Aquinas and the Metaphysics of Creation, 2019, published by the Oxford University Press. So there's some good reading for all of you in the future. He's also an avid podcaster. And our next speaker after Gavin is Robert Preston. He's director of the think tank Living and Dying Well, and that was established 2010. He was formerly a Whitehall civil servant, then a parliamentary staff member and clerk to the Mackay Committee inquiry into assisted dying. And in my experience, parliamentary clerks perform a wonderful role, because they're the people that actually do all the work, as far as I'm concerned, in committees, because they draw up all the documents, etc., do all the leg work and produce the goods at the end of the day. And then the politicians take credit for the work of the parliamentary clerks. So we look forward to hearing from you, Robert. And our final speaker is Baroness Elora Finlay, and she's a Welsh member of the House of Lords. a professor of palliative medicine, and is a crossbencher in the House of Lords. And Elora and Robert have co-authored a book entitled Death by Appointment, A Rational Guide to the Assisted Dying Debate, and that's been previously mentioned by Eamon, and we'll get a link to that to anybody who's interested in acquiring that particular book. And then at the very end of the session, Baroness Nuala Lone will make some concluding remarks, and Nuala is very well known to people here in Northern Ireland and is Iona Northern Ireland's distinguished patron. So I'm going to call Gaven now. We've heard from Eamon, and we'll just take it away and invite Gaven to speak. If about 20 minutes, Gaven, if you feel you want a little bit more time, then take it. But 20 minutes is really your slot.
Great.
Okay, right, Gaven.
Thank you, Alban. So I'm just sharing my screen here. Here's the PowerPoint here. And can I just thank everybody, and thank you for the invitation from Iona to have me on here. It's a real privilege. And it's a real privilege to be speaking here with Eamon Gaines involved, because way back in 2002, Eamon was my first teacher of ethics within the Thomistic and Scholastic traditions. So anything which is good in this is down to Eamon's influence, and anything which is poor, it's all my fault. So you can blame me for any of the bad stuff and blame Eamon for the good stuff. Okay, so Down with Dignity. So this talk that I'm going to give you is today. This was my initial reaction to the Down with Dignity bill in the South when it just came into the news that it was passing through the government in the South. A colleague of mine shared the news from RTE with me through WhatsApp, and immediately I thought, well, you know, I mean, St. Patrick's College, Maynooth, you know, I need to kind of write something about this. So I put together a position paper. A portion of that was published in the Irish Catholic. And then I sort of gave this talk to several societies and to several groups. And well, this is a similar sort of talk here. And what the focus is on is the notion of dignity, which is in the bill. I want to explore that notion of dignity because I think the bill has a problematic view of what dignity is. And I think its view of dignity stands in contrast to international conventions, specifically the European Convention on Human Rights and its predecessor, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It stands in contrast to the notion of dignity, which is at work in those human rights documents and of which Ireland is a signatory. Okay, so I just want to have a look at what this notion of dignity is and what it involves. The general context which tends to motivate the question of euthanasia, assisted suicide, etc., is that question of dignity. And in the traditional argumentation, the idea goes, and this is the idea which is sort of motivating the bill and motivating the public discussion, is that patients, they've reached a certain stage of illness or dependency, and having reached that stage, there is required some continual dependency on more and more medical care or intervention so that they're judged as lacking in dignity or that they've lost dignity in some sort of way. I gave an ethics lecture to a group of nursing students in University of Limerick a few years back because this is part of their ethics course. And when I presented the account of dignity, immediately the reaction is that, you know, once one loses some set of capacities or is unable to do something, then one is no longer leading a dignified life. So the view here, the assumed view, is that dignity is the result of certain capacities that one has. So the assumption fundamentally is that dignity is an achievement. You can achieve dignity so long as you have certain capacities. And then when you lose those capacities, you've lost your dignity. So that's the idea. And that's the underlying motivation, that dignity is some sort of an achievement, which can be achieved. Obviously, you're not born with it, and you can lose it as well. So in the context of assisted suicide, of euthanasia, then the idea is the loss of dignity involving the loss of certain capacities. Now, dignity is taken to ground a right to life, and I'll explain that in the next portion of the talk. But dignity is taken to ground a right to life. One has a right to life because one has dignity. So the question is, can one achieve or lose this dignity that one has, and which grounds one's right to life? And I just want to focus on living things and what it is to be alive and the different circumstances that living things can find themselves in. So you could take any example of a living thing, such as a tree, horse, a dog, a human. They're all living things. Now, they don't cease to be the kind of things that they are given a change in their circumstances. So, for example, a tree is still a tree in the autumn as it is in the spring. Okay, so our eucalyptus tree out the back, our bamboo trees out the front or whatever, they're still the same living things that they are, regardless of their change in circumstances. You wouldn't say in autumn, once the leaves turn brown and start to fall, that that tree is no longer the tree that it was in the spring. It's the same thing which subsists throughout all those changes and all those differences in circumstances. Okay, so its circumstances just change, but the thing itself remains the same. And so the life that that thing enjoys is the same kind of life. So the life of the thing is the same throughout its life. Now, if dignity is taking to ground a right to life, which is something we're going to explore in a bit, then the life of the thing thus grounded is the life of an individual thing. So dignity grounds the right to life. It's the life of the individual thing which is grounded in its dignity. Now, that thing's life doesn't change. It doesn't become a different kind of life just because its circumstances have changed. So, for example, the life of a tree doesn't become the life of a dog or the life of a human just because the tree changes in color from spring to autumn. Similarly, it's November. We're coming to the end of November. Prior to November, I once had a glorious beard, almost as glorious as Eamon's there. Okay. And then I did Movember, shaved it off, raised money for charity, and had my mustache. Now, did I cease to be the individual human being that I was simply because there was some sort of accidental change in me? No, obviously not. You know, my wife didn't wake up one morning to see me with a mustache and think, oh God, where's Gavin gone? No, obviously she was outraged. You know, she wasn't happy at all about this mustache, but she didn't think that I was a different me. I was still me. I subsisted through that. Similarly, the tree subsists throughout all the different changes and seasons as the tree that it is. If we have, say, laws covering flora and fauna and laws about protection, you know, of our nice old trees and our parks and everything, we don't think that those laws only apply during the spring when the trees, you know, look magnificent, but not in the autumn when the trees aren't looking too great and, you know, we could just cut them down. Obviously, that's absurd. The laws apply to the life of the thing precisely because it remains the same thing that it is throughout. So similarly, the life of a human being doesn't change to a non-human kind of life when its circumstances changes. So just because its circumstances and its different accidental characteristics change doesn't mean that the life of that human being has changed. It still remains a human life, and so its dignity is still grounded, and in which case it still has the right to life, even though its circumstances change. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And what that means is that they're born free and equal, all of them, regardless of their circumstances. It makes no distinction about human beings born in Europe or born in Asia or born in America. And it makes no distinction on the status or the capacities of various human beings. So they have this dignity just in virtue of being born human. Okay, and they don't cease to be human until they die. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, later codified in the European Convention, of which Ireland is a signatory, recognizes the universality of human dignity, regardless of the circumstances that they find themselves in. Human beings have this in virtue of being born. They're born free with this dignity. So if dignity grounds the right to life, and the life thus grounded is the same throughout the life of the individual, regardless of the circumstances, then the dignity of the individual remains throughout whatever circumstances it finds itself in. It's not an achievement. It's not something which you can achieve or something that you can lose because your circumstances change. Rather, you gain dignity or you lose dignity simply in virtue of being human or ceasing to be human. And when do you become human? Well, from the moment of conception. When do you cease to be human? Well, when you die. So you have that throughout your life, and you'll have this dignity throughout the circumstances of your life. And if that dignity then grounds the right to life, you have that right to life for as long as you are human, and you don't cease to have it simply because your circumstances change. But why would we think then that dignity grounds the right to life? Why would we think that? What's the reason to think that? This is another, in presenting ethics lectures, not so much to philosophers, but to medical personnel. the pushback is sometimes, well, I think that, dignity would ground a right to life. Surely that's just nostalgic, emotive sort of thinking. So I'm just going to take you through some of the reasons as to why one would think dignity grounds the right to life. The dignity of a person consists in the fact that the person needs to be treated as an end in himself or herself, and never as a means or an instrument to one's own ends. And why would we think that's the case? It's because a person is the kind of thing that can determine his or her ends for themselves. Okay, that's what it is to be a person. Want to be, in certain circumstances, able to choose your own ends for yourself and determine your own ends. To usurp a person's ends and to treat a person as a means to your own ends, so to treat a person as an instrument, is not to treat a person as the thing that he or she is, but to treat it as something non-person, non-human. Okay? So the only approach then that we can have to another person is one of willing the good for that person, because that's how we deal with things which we treat as ends. What we treat as ends, we value and thus will them as the goods that they are. What we treat as instruments to get us to an end, that's dispensable. Okay, we're happy to dispense with instruments because they get us our goal. And then once we have our goal, we rest content with the goal. So we value that which we treat as ends. Now, if persons are to be treated as ends, then they're to be valued. They're not dispensable. They're not to be treated as instruments. So in the context of the end of life care, then, the loss of certain capacities doesn't entail the loss of dignity. Given that a person who in sickness loses certain capacities and retains his or her dignity, that person still needs to be treated as an end in himself or herself, i.e., they need to be valued for the goods that they are. Their good must be willed for no other reason than that it is good. But the very life of a person is a fundamental good. This is because it is a good thing to be alive. Human beings are good things. It is good to have them in existence. To deny that is to say that human life per se is a bad thing. So the very life of a person is a good, even though the circumstances in which a person can find himself or herself may not be very good, yet the very life of that person is a good. So to will the end of the life of a person is not to will the good of that person, but is to will contrary to the good of that person and contrary to the dignity of the person. So appeals to human dignity, then, they can never be taken to justify the ending of a human life. Rather, appeals to human dignity can only affirm the goodness of any human life. So an appeal to dignity can't be taken as a justifying factor in ending a life. Okay, it can only be taken to ground a life, and that's the notion of dignity, which is present in the Universal Declaration and then codified in the European Convention, of which Ireland is a signatory. And it's because of this and that account of dignity that I think that the bill in the South, the Dying with Dignity Bill, is somewhat misguided, because the approach to dignity that it takes is the very opposite to the account of dignity in those human rights documents. It takes it that dignity is an achievement, something which can be achieved, and then it's something that can be lost as well. So the key summary points then, just to finish up, is that our life as a human life is something that we have per se. We don't have it circumstantially. We have life in virtue of being a human being. So our life doesn't change just because our circumstances change. Okay, just like, the tree remains the same tree throughout autumn and winter and so forth, or, I'm still me, even though my beard is gone, although making a bit of a comeback. If dignity grounds our right to life, and the life thus grounded subsists throughout all those changing circumstances, then dignity remains throughout those circumstances, regardless of what those circumstances are. So dignity attaches to the life of the person and not to the circumstances in which he or she finds himself or herself. So dignity is not something that can be achieved or lost. It's something that one has throughout one's life, and so appeals to dignity can't be taken to can't be used to justify the taking of a human life. They can only be used to justify the affirmation of the goodness of that human life. And so this is why I think the Dying with Dignity Bill is severely problematic, runs contrary to those human rights problems, and it runs contrary to the ethics of human dignity and human life. Okay, so that's what I've got for you today. By my count, that's about 18 or 19 minutes. I was given 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I'm happy enough to take questions if, or do we move on to the next speaker? Alban, you're the chairperson.